Hi guys! So I've been thinking quite a lot recently about yoga, and not just the physical practice of yoga and the asanas, but also about yoga as a spiritual practice, as a kind of complete spiritual practice in and of itself. And the practice of meditation as part of yoga and all of that kind of thing. And this is a subject that I actually don't know a huge amount about. I really haven't cracked any books on the topic. The only yoga books I've ever read have been really just focusing on the postures and perhaps looking a little bit into the pranayama, the breath, the exercises for the breath as well, but really not going beyond that into any of the more philosophical aspects or the meditation aspects or anything like that. And if any of you are, I know some of you or a lot of you will be a lot more deep into yoga than I am. Perhaps some of you have read some great books that maybe get more into the spiritual aspect of it or whatever. So if anybody has any resources or anything, any books in particular that they want to suggest to me, then absolutely go for it, because my first port of call, generally speaking, when it comes to exploring anything like this is to crack a few books. But it's something that is interesting me a lot at the moment, and it's making me feel like I'm ready to actually maybe move deeper, a little bit deeper into yoga. While the physical aspect of it has really, for the first year and a half, was really all that I was interested in with yoga, the more that I've heard people talk about their yoga practice from a spiritual perspective, and the more blogs that I've read about it from a spiritual perspective, the more interested I've become in it as a sort of holistic spiritual practice. So I've been quite familiar with the concept of yoga as a physical practice from a very young age, because my father actually practices yoga and he did so for probably about a decade. He primarily looked at it from a kind of stretching physical perspective, because he actually had a very bad back, and somebody suggested to him that he try yoga to strengthen his back and to try and, you know, heal that injury, and he managed to do so. Now my dad is not the kind of, like, he didn't go to any yoga classes at the time. To be fair, there probably really weren't any available in Dublin, because we're talking about the 1980s. So basically he picked up a few books, but basically the reason I came to yoga 2 years ago was again because of my back. So I went to my dad and I was like, look, you did yoga, it sorted your back out, can you please teach me? Now, such is the relationship between me and my dad that I was way too, it just wasn't going to work that he was going to be able to sit down and actually teach me anything. So after he kind of talked me through a few basics, he just gave me his books, and I started to learn a couple of sequences from those books. But basically, up until last week, I was completely, like him, completely self-taught and had just never been to a yoga class at all, and kind of balked at the idea. Yoga absolutely did help my back immensely. It definitely started to strengthen me. It was only a couple of months after I started doing yoga that I took up running, and I have found the two of them to be, they balance each other out very well, I think. But that, up to that point, you know, it was all just this desire to become more physically healthy. And I mean, I think I had this feeling that I needed to wake my body up. I was able to feel that my body was kind of sluggish, that I was not really pushing myself physically, that I was very unfit, that I wasn't strong, and I just really wanted to change that. And I felt like that was really impeding on my mental clarity, on my happiness, my well-being in general, and as a result then, like, my spirituality, my kind of spiritual self as well, that it was all being impacted by this sort of lack of any kind of physical movement, and also, like I say, just a mind-body connection, because I know that not everybody can do vigorous exercise, and I don't necessarily think that you have to, you know, in order to have a healthy mind-body connection, and in order to feel alive and awake. You know, you can do whatever you can do in order to achieve that, but it seemed like the thing that I needed and wanted to do at that time was just to become, yeah, to be able to run and to do yoga, to be kind of more flexible and more connected, more in tune with my body and with the kind of, yeah. I was kind of becoming aware that I kind of have very bad posture, that I kind of hold myself in kind of very defensive kind of positions and stuff like that, and yoga just seemed like this wonderful kind of beacon of hope for straightening out my body and therefore probably straightening out my mind. But because I had this block about going to classes, I really wasn't able to deepen my practice or really improve a huge amount over the first kind of year and a half, because I really didn't want to push myself too hard without having a teacher to correct me if I was doing something wrong or anything like that. And it's only been recently when I started to listen to people talking about their yoga practice on YouTube, and particularly listening to people who do Ashtanga yoga, I started to understand that there was something more to it that maybe the other kind of spiritual practices that I have don't necessarily bring to the table so much, that they don't. I suppose just that yoga might be particularly suited to me at this time in my life, that it might have a unique ability to make me face aspects of myself and my spiritual self, my emotional self, my physical self, that otherwise it would be very difficult for me to actually come face to face with. And I suppose this is probably tied in with shadow work as well, that I sort of started a shadow work practice, but I've always felt like it never really got off the ground, and I just started to feel like yoga would actually really aid me in that and actually start to open up an ability for me to see where things needed to be faced and what things needed to be uncovered. When I started to listen to people who were doing much more challenging and vigorous types of physical yoga practices, when I started listening to what they were saying about how it brought up things for themselves, how it really opened them up to their conditioning, to their emotional conditioning, that doing the challenging yoga poses really kind of brings to light and sheds light on a lot of restrictions and a lot of, yeah, conditioning that we've grown up with, that we've been kind of closing ourselves off with. And that really resonated with me when I started to listen to videos and read blog posts and stuff, with people kind of saying that kind of thing. Because even though my yoga practice has never been very vigorous but I definitely noticed from a very early point, I definitely noticed that in any sort of challenging poses, and particularly I noticed poses that were very good for my lower back pain, when I did them, I was feeling the kind of uncomfortable sensation that you often get when you're putting yourself into a yoga posture that is a little bit difficult for you. And anyone who, you know, exercises or does stretches or anything like that will probably be familiar with that kind of feeling that I'm talking about. It's not pain, it doesn't feel bad, and you can tell that you're not injuring yourself from it, hopefully. But it's just this intense discomfort, and you don't necessarily feel like, okay, this is bad, I need to get out of this right now. But there is some part of your mind just saying, I can't deal with this. This is too much, and it's kind of overwhelming. And I found myself being really overwhelmed by this to an extent that I really couldn't quite logically understand, because the poses weren't difficult enough to be explaining, you know, this intense emotional response. The level of physical discomfort was, you know, not extreme, but I was really noticing all this emotional kind of stuff coming up to the point where I would feel like crying, or might even actually cry while doing some of the yoga poses, and not out of pain, but just out of this weird emotional kind of overwhelm. And I think once I started experiencing, but the more I kind of gradually started to push myself, gradually started to see like, this is doing me good, I haven't injured myself, I'm clearly not doing anything wrong here, and the more I allowed myself to get into that feeling of physical discomfort, and yeah, it really was very revealing to me. And the more my spiritual practice has developed at the same time, because it all has been kind of happening as one big kind of evolution, I suppose. And the more I started to get in touch with my own intuition and what's actually going on in the inner realm for me, like emotionally and psychologically and kind of unconsciously, the more I started to see that what was coming up for me in those times with those difficult poses was quite often the most difficult emotions that I was trying to work through. And the same thing happens to me with meditation, but in a different kind of way. I find that with meditation, I very often start to feel very anxious. And that's very interesting because anxiety is one of the most problematic emotional things that I kind of have been trying to work through for quite a lot of years now. So essentially, I think my point is that I realized after a while that yoga definitely has something quite unique to it for me, that it has this unique ability to expose me to those challenging feelings that I've been kind of repressing and holding in, and also kind of cloaking myself with. And at first I kind of thought, oh, I just have to kind of work through this, that after a while once I've experienced these emotions as they come up during yoga, then they will dissipate again and I'll have worked through them. But after a while, the more I read about meditation and about yoga in general, the more I started to understand that it's not even so much to do with a sort of, I don't know, that there was a limited amount of this emotion within me that just needed to be released and then it would be gone. But actually that I had to start learning how to deal with that emotion when it arises, and that it's not necessarily ever going to completely go away, and that those were emotional responses that I have within me that come up in difficult situations. And it's interesting, like, that the yoga poses were almost aping more kind of social or emotional situations that I would be in my personal life, that a lot of the, once I put myself into those slightly difficult positions, that those kind of same responses were basically starting to arise, responses to feeling lonely, responses to feeling abandoned or feeling disappointed or anxious, just so many different kind of difficulties that I have. And it really makes so much sense to me when people talk about it from a perspective that you're kind of learning how to work through your conditioning. And the more I've been learning about emotional issues and emotional pain and psychological turmoil and the inner terrain, the more I've been realizing how much of the emotional difficulties that I have faced in my life do have to do with conditioning, rather than just being an inevitable, innate reaction to a situation, which is really liberating. Because it kind of means that, like I say, it's not so much what I thought, that you just have a certain amount of this pain that needs to be worked through and then it's gone. It's actually more that once you start experiencing those particular kinds of feelings and emotional problems in your childhood, and the more you kind of keep going through that same cycle, it turns into this repetitious cycle. It turns into this sort of constant pattern of responding the same way to the same issues. And at the end of the day, these things are always going to come up in life, and you're never going to be able to avoid feelings of disappointment or rejection or whatever it is, stress, anxiety. Like, there are always going to be triggers for those feelings no matter what in your life. People are never going to live up to your full expectations, and hopefully, particularly if you don't start to let go of those expectations, which is all part of that kind of endless cycle as well. And yeah, I really started to understand that I couldn't just wait it out, that I couldn't just go through that every time and then just kind of say to myself, at some point I will learn to be happier, at some point I will stop, at some point it will become easier. I just thought that I just had to work through it and then it would be easier, then life would become easier. I just had to get through the pain. But yeah, the realization that I've been having recently is that the pain is always there for me to pick up again if I want to. That discomfort is always there if I allow myself to. And really what I need to be doing with those kind of uncomfortable feelings in yoga, in meditation and in life, is learning to witness them, witness the feeling, witness the experience, but not react. So learning to dissociate myself, my inner self, my higher self, from the very visceral kind of response, reaction, kind of fight or flight almost reaction to the discomfort. And this is something that I would have almost railed against when I was younger, because it suggested to me, that kind of attitude suggested to me that emotions aren't real, that they're not important, and that, you know, yeah, that they're not valid. And the idea to me that emotions are valid and that our existence is validated by the strength of our emotions, it was hugely important to me because I was always such an emotional person. And looking back on it now, I can see that one of the reasons anyway, that I was so emotional was that I was actually struggling through so many negative patterns and so much conditioning. And it wasn't actually so much that, you know, those emotions were more pure or more important or more valid than other people's emotions. You know, like in that, like, I always fell in love harder than any of my friends as a teenager, and always felt everything, seemed to feel everything much more strongly than other people. And I really prided myself in that. I thought this was a really good thing, that it really validated my existence, that even though I wasn't living the life that I wanted to be living, and that was how I felt for all of my teenage years, it was okay because my existence was validated by the ferocity of my emotions. And so I really clung on to them, negative ones and all. Like, I just really clung on to them, and I really bought into that idea that, you know, in order to have the super, super highs, that you have to have the really awful lows. And I think that is true to some point in life. I think that, you know, we do need to allow ourselves to experience the fullness of life in order to have the wonderful experiences. But I've just been learning a lot recently about how, you know, the happiness isn't found by managing to stay in those highs more of the time. That was always what I thought. That was always how I thought it worked. I thought that, you know, you learn how to be really, really happy and really, really in love by experiencing the awful lows in life. And then hopefully over time you manage to sort your life out and get it all kind of neat and ordered, and, you know, get the right job, not just a job, like the right job, the right career, the things that will make you the happiest. You'll be in the right relationship, living in the right place, with the right friends, and everything kind of neatly ordered and aligned so that it's perfectly set up to bring you that kind of high, that high emotional state all the time, that you just be happy all the time because everything is going right for you all the time. And that life is really just this progression of managing to extricate all the things that were bringing you the lows, and adding in more and more stuff, kind of tweaking everything until it just was constantly bringing you those highs. And that obviously was a very difficult place to be coming from into a relationship. Because I don't think, you know, no relationship was ever going to seem right for me. No relationship was ever going to make me happy, because every single time something would go wrong in the relationship, it would seem to me like, oh, this is an absolute disaster, because my relationship should nearly always, or always if possible, be bringing me these highs. And anytime anything made me feel in any way negative or sad, that was an absolute disaster to me, because I was trying to eliminate that. I was trying to cut it out of my life, and it made me very sad and scared to be facing, you know, experiencing those things within a romantic relationship, because every single time I would have to start questioning my entire relationship. I would have to start asking myself, are the lows cancelling out the highs? Where am I on the balance of things? And should I be thinking about ending this relationship, even though it makes me feel gut-wrenchingly sad to do so? And it's taken me years and years, like 5, 6, 7 years, oh, way more than that. I mean, I've been thinking like that for basically my whole life, for at least 15 years of my life now, I would say. And it's finally dawned on me. I mean, obviously we want to avoid the lows as much as possible. And if something is making us really miserable, and if something is really just difficult and negative and challenging in bad ways, then obviously, you know, sometimes it is best for us to just leave that thing, that career, that job, that person, that relationship behind, But it's been a very slow realization that I've been having for a couple of years now, where I've been realizing that the happiness is not in that roller coaster. The happiness is in what lies kind of beyond that, beneath that. Like when you're not caught up in that kind of up and down, what's going on with my life right now, and that kind of ego-driven roller coaster, what do you actually feel like in yourself when you're, you know, on your own, sitting in silence, and without all of that external stuff? That's where the happiness is, and that's where the contentment lies. And until you manage to find peace with that, and find that kind of inner spiritual still self, you know, you're always going to be on that roller coaster, and there's always, like I say, the discontent and the pain is always going to be there for you to tap into, if that's what you want to do, or if that's what you're stuck doing, because we get stuck on that cycle. So that's been a really, and I kept thinking for years that I had understood that I had understood that happiness wasn't something that just happens to you, but that you have to go out and find it. But initially that idea just strengthened the belief I had that you have to chase after happiness in a way, in that way of kind of just eliminating the kind of the negative parts and chasing after the good parts, and ordering everything in this like perfect kind of, you know, perfect universe kind of thing, rather than realizing that happiness is something that you have to chase, but you do it within. You know, you don't necessarily do it by searching for things outside of yourself, by searching for the perfect people, the perfect job, the perfect life, because until you've done it within, until you find that kind of inner silence and peace and contentment, then it doesn't matter how compatible your friends, your relationship, your job is to you, you're not going to find that kind of pure happiness. So yeah, I've been becoming very interested in yoga as a means to examine my conditioning and start to really have a look at those patterns, those emotional patterns and cycles that are going on. You know, a way to find that inner peace and contentedness and stay in that place and observe myself from that place, and start to see, you know, where in my life and with what emotions I actually do need to step in and respond and say, you know, this needs to change, or in what places in my life actually those negative emotional responses aren't serving me at all and are just kind of negative patterns and old hurts that need to be just released and worked through, and just you know, for me to just stay calm through. So yeah, I went to my first yoga class last week, which was interesting. It was the first time I did a really vigorous kind of yoga sequence, and that was interesting. Like, my body was killing me the next day. I thought I was fit and strong. It turns out no, not as much as I thought. And I will be going to different types of yoga classes, and I'm probably going to start doing a different personal practice myself, that I'm going to try Ashtanga yoga, for example, myself, and just see where it takes me, basically.